Welcome back to Gloved Up Garage. In this episode, I'll be working on tearing down the 4.6 for our 98 Cobra project the rest of the way. In the previous episode, I had taken everything off the outside of the engine. Obviously you got the cam covers off of the heads and all the timing chains and all of the tensioners. All of that stuff is off. So now I'm left with what is called a short block. In this case, pistons are still inside the bores. And honestly, it doesn't look too terrible. I can kind of still see some crosshatch on the bores. I would say that it's definitely had a rough 71,000 miles to it. A lot of carbon on the top of the pistons. It's not too terrible. I don't see any damage to the tops of the pistons, which would typically suggest like detonation or something like that. That cylinder there, it's got a lot of residue inside of it. So does that one. I haven't physically turned the engine over yet, so I wanted to open this thing up before I put anything into the bores of the cylinders by moving the pistons up and down. The heads, they look really good as far as the combustion chambers go. None of the valves look damaged. None of them look bent. You can see that's the driver's side head. And then spin around here to the passenger side head. Just a lot of carbon built up in the combustion chambers, nothing major. So from this point, I'm going to roll this over and get all the coolant out of the block. Before I roll the engine over on the stand, I'm going to actually take a shot vac and hit some of the coolant passages just to get the rest of that residual coolant out. I spilled a little bit on the floor, but basically these are your coolant passages here. So I'm going to hit my shot vac on those, try to get as much coolant out of the block as I possibly can before I roll this over. And make even bigger of a mess on my floor. A little bit of oil dry and a drip pan goes a long way, but still some of it's going to spill out. So once I get this thing rolled over, I'm going to drain, before I roll it and get the coolant out too, I'm going to drain the rest of the oil out of the pan. I know there's some residual from where it's just stripped down, so I'll go ahead and drop the oil pan and get that off of there, get any of the oil out just to, again, try to not make a mess of my floor. So I'll get to that and then I'll come right back. Made a little bit of progress and got the oil pan off. I had one bolt that the head almost rounded off on it, and thank goodness I've got some Irwin extractor sockets because the head on that bolt was bad. I thought I was going to have to weld a nut on and back it off with the nut after it was welded, but was able to pull it out. So I went ahead and spun the motor over so you can see the bottom side now. I've got to get the oil pickup and the windage tray off before I can start tearing into the engine. I forgot to get this rear cover off while I had it suspended in the air. So these are usually a blast. There's like 6 bolts to hold them on. I'll get that off of there. I might have to bring my hoist back in, suspend the engine, get that off, put it back on the stand, but we'll get to that. No big deal. Pickup tube looks pretty good. I'm not seeing a lot of debris. Looks like there's a little, a few shavings and material in there. Not really sure what that is. Could be just left over from the machining process on something that got down inside one of the oil passages. Who knows? I did find the drains on the block for the water, like the coolant passages, and that's got a ton of stuff built up inside of it. The one on the other side is the same way. So from here, I'll go ahead and get this stuff loose. I'll probably go ahead and take off the oil pump. Once I get the pickup off, I'm not going to reuse that oil pump. I'll go ahead and replace it with a new, standard volume, standard pressure. And then from there, we'll start looking at the rod bearings and then the main bearings. So I got the oil pickup and the windage tray off. And the next thing to do is start breaking loose these rod bolts, these right here. And then that will allow me to get the rod and the piston out of the engine through the top of the engine. So I'll start working on that and then move on to the main bearings, which these 5 bearings here, those are the main bearings. Those are the ones that hold the crankshaft. I still got to get that rear cover off. I'll figure out a way to get that thing off of there, but that'll help me once I get to that point of letting me get the crank out of the block. So I'm going to stop here and start breaking loose these rods and getting these pistons out. Alright, got all the connecting rods off. I have to say I'm really impressed with the crank. It looks a lot better than I anticipated when I opened the engine. Seeing all that sludge and debris and stuff kind of built up everywhere made me think that there would be excessive wear on the rod bolt, or on the rod bearings, I'm sorry. All the journals look good. These are the journals here, so that you can see with the 2 different rods set on the crank. All of them look really good. I think there's a couple of really small scratches that will polish up, hopefully. I'll get this crank out and get it off to the machine shop. I did notice when I was taking the rods out that the bearings that are in here, I mean, they look brand new. Normally you would kind of see some wear on these bearings. What you're seeing there is a lot of oil. There are some small scratches, and you can see where, like on that particular bearing, there's a scratch there in the middle. Really small, you can barely catch it with your fingernail, but it is there. There is some wear, like on that bearing there. The light's got some glare on it, but you can see there's a scratch right in the middle of it, right there. But again, I mean, overall, I'm impressed that it doesn't look like any of the rods have spun. When I pop the bearings out, they all look like they're in good shape, like a bearing has never spun inside the rod itself. So it's possible that someone was into this engine. Maybe they put a set of rod bearings in the bottom at one point. Once I get to the mains, that's really going to tell me a lot more. It's unusual to change the mains out because of how much work it is to get them out. Rod bearings are pretty easy. You drop the pan, drop the pickup tube and the windage tray, and you can get right to them. So they could almost be done under the car in some instances. But I'll know a lot more. I'm going to go ahead and get this rear cover off, try to get it out of the way, and then I'll start taking off the main bearing caps. And to get those off, like I had mentioned in another video, these side bolts have to come out, and then some of these are nuts and some of them are some of them are bolts and some of them are studs. But basically you take, the 4 bolts out of each one of these main bearing caps, and then the side bolts come out, the main bearing cap comes off. They can be a little bit of fun. A lot of times they are in the block very well. Some of the more modern main caps have adjustments where they have like a part that screws out to the block and then you put the bolt in. In this case, I don't believe these are that style. I believe they're just in the block, but I'll know a lot more once I get to the next step where I start taking them off. So I'll get to that point and then come back. Okay, so I've made some pretty good progress here. I've got all the main caps off. All of the journals look pretty decent. You can see that there's a little bit of wear on that one, the center one. And well, that's the second one right here, and then the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. The fifth one's actually what they call a thrust bearing. It rides on the side of the crank in that groove there. It looks pretty good. All of these bearings look really good. There's a few scratches on some of them, but there's no major wear. There's a few shiny spots and uneven wear on some of them. So I think I'll send this crank to the machine shop. I'm going to send the block out as well. Have them look at the crank just to make sure it's not bent, which would cause uneven wear on the bearing. And then also just make sure that everything specs out good. If they need to do anything, they may have to cut down these surfaces on these journals, and then we go with what's called an oversized bearing. Basically, they make these smaller, and you put a larger bearing to take up the space that you cut. And you wind up with a very true, smooth, and clean surface to kind of start over with. I was correct. This block does have these side adjusters in it. Basically, these inserts that you're seeing here are threaded into the block. When you put the cap back on, you run these into a certain torque spec until it butts up against the side of the cap, and then you run that bolt through. That's kind of like the last step you do when you're assembling these things. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and take the crank out, clean it off the best that I can. I'll go ahead and take those threaded inserts out of the block. I've pretty much got everything off. The oil pump's off. Everything is ready to go. I'll tear this down the rest of the way, and then we'll get this in the car and take it to the machine shop. Probably be a week or so before I can get it there, so this may be the end of the video for now. I really don't have anything else to do at this point other than to start cleaning up, like the timing cover, the rear cover, the cam covers, basically that huge pile of parts right here. I'm going to go ahead and clean up this oil pan, the pickup tube, and the windage tray so that I can reuse that stuff. I'll need to source another oil pan bolt so that I can replace the one that was rounded off. And to that point, I don't have anything else to do other than just to clean things up until we get this block back from the machine shop. We'll see how this goes. We'll see what the machine shop says. Hopefully they have good news for us. I'm really hoping that the crank, as far as the rods go, are reusable, because I do have a brand new set of rod bearings that are made for this engine from another project that I had in the past. I'd really like to not have to pay another 50 to 60 bucks for a set of rod bearings, but if I do, I will. It's not that big of a deal. It's just, it would be nice not to have to spend the money. So that's where I'm at for now. I'll start cleaning up some of this stuff, and I'll come back at the next step. All right, I turned the block back over, and I was looking at the bores and the cylinders a little closer. I see a few things that I'm not very comfortable with, and I'm really hoping that it will clean up and not require it to be bored or a new sleeve put in. Where these pistons were sitting inside of this engine, and I guess it just had some water get in there, humidity, condensation, whatever you want to call it, you can basically see where the oil ring or the compression ring was sitting in each one of these bores. So that may clean up with a hone. You can, with a light, you can get in there, you can see some crosshatch on the wall still. The main problem I found that's really concerning, there's a rough spot right there in the number 8 cylinder. If my camera will focus, it's right there. You can catch it with your fingernail. It's a little deep. I'm not real happy with it. I'm hoping with a hone it'll clean up. Worst case scenario, I'll have to have that cylinder re-sleeved. Absolute worst case scenario, the whole block will need to be bored and or re-sleeved. So the machine shop that I had planned to take this to, I contacted them, and well, I attempted to contact them, and they're out of business. So I've got to find another machine shop that I can trust to work on this engine. The guy that I had used for many, many years, awesome guy, kind of a one-man operation, and he retired. So kudos to him for stepping away and getting some retirement in. But I've got to find another shop now and find someone I can trust with this project. Also managed to get some of the parts cleaned up, put away and organized. That whole mess of parts that was over here on the floor, gone through, cleaned everything up. As far as the floor, so I can put another vehicle in here if I need to. I just basically need to move these totes and these boxes. Of course, the crank's going to the machine shop, the rods and the pistons will go. I'll clean up the timing cover and the intake. As far as the cam covers go, I don't know that I'm going to reuse these. I may clean them in my parts washer and just set them aside. One of the things I want to do is clean up the front of this engine. These cars had coils on the front, and the plug wires run from the cylinder head on these cam covers all the way up to the front of the motor, where the coils are mounted on the front of the motor. I want to clean this up. I like the aesthetics of it. I've gotten rid of all the smog equipment on the front of the motor too. So I just want to clean the whole front of this engine up, make it look really nice. So again, you can't use these if you're using the coil on plug style, because basically what I'm going to do is I'll put the 99 and up coils that each individually go on the plugs. Then there's a wire harness that loops around and plugs into where the coils used to plug into. All that goes on, and it's much cleaner. Basically the same thing that I've got on the Marauder. It's exactly the same thing as the Marauder. So I've got to find another set of cam covers. I've got to find the coils, got to find the harness, which all that stuff's out there on eBay, but I'd really like to keep the cost of this project down as low as I can. So I'll do some junkyard searching and see what we can come up with. For now, that's going to be it for this episode of Gloved Up Garage. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to be notified when we upload new videos. Check us out on TikTok. I uploaded a new TikTok the other day. You can search Gloved Up Garage on TikTok and find us on there. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.